Martin, how was the Czechoslovak economy organised and structured under communism?
Well, it was a centrally planned economy based on the model that had been developed earlier in the Soviet Union, which means it was almost overwhelmingly state ownership, and also the state took the major economic decisions on prices and things of that sort. But I think it's just as important, not how it was organised internally, but just as important how it related to other countries.
Like Russia?
Above all, the Soviet Union, that it was tied into the Soviet bloc, that Czechoslovakia had developed as the exporter of modern machinery and modern equipment and imported mostly raw materials from these other countries.
So it was an industrial kind of powerhouse for Eastern Europe, but how rich was it in relation to other countries?
In relation to other countries in the world, it's very difficult, of course, to compare because as the prices weren't the same and so on, as there weren't the contacts, anything is only an estimate. They did make estimates that seemed to me reasonably reliable in the years immediately before 1989, and they came out with figures like a national income level per capita, maybe 55% of the richest countries in Western Europe. That wasn't that much different. It was a bit lower from what it had been back in the 1930s if we take the average for Czechoslovakia as a whole.
When Czechoslovakia was a normal, or more or less normal democratic country.
When it considered itself to be one of the richer countries in the world, albeit not the richest, and indeed it was a democratic country, yeah.
What changes took place in Czechoslovakia after the fall of communism in 1989?
Well, one of the most visible changes, of course, was the reduction in state ownership and the change to privatisation and private ownership. A lot of small enterprises were set up. That was obviously a great opportunity to fill the gap in low levels of services that there had been before.
Basically, people bought businesses?
You could set up your own. Also, the big state enterprises were privatised. They were transferred to private ownership by various means. We can maybe talk about that more in a minute, but I think just as important as those changes, again, look at the international changes, look at how they related to other countries altered. That the links with the Soviet Union and with other Eastern European countries very substantially reduced, if not completely broken, and instead a reorientation towards Western Europe. And in fact, you could say, in the previous period, very much tied into the Soviet bloc, in the subsequent period, even more closely tied in with Western Europe, and particularly Germany. And a lot of contact. They had in fact had contacts with other parts of the world, third world countries and so on before, and that effectively reduced. Much more tied in with a particular bloc, this time a richer one, Western Europe.
So the Czech Republic is a supplier to Germany, you would say?
Not only Germany, of course, also other Western European countries, but they're tied in closely with motor vehicle production in the Czech Republic, closely ties in with that in Germany. There are other French, Japanese and so on companies operate in the Czech Republic, but they sell to Western Europe, and Germany a very large market for them.
Was the restructuring economically successful?
The changes that took place, again, if we compare the level of national income back in 1989 with what it would be today, they haven't really gained relative to Western Europe. Two big problems that interrupted them. First is what they call the transformation depression, that in that first period, when they lost the markets with the Soviet Union and the Soviet bloc countries, so that was a substantial decline in output, people lost their jobs and so on, and the recovery is a different matter. That comes later and subsequently, that things that are more oriented towards Western Europe develop. So there was a substantial and quite deep depression, 1991-92. There was again a further period of depression at the end of 1990s, owing to different economic policies that have been pursued in the 90s that maybe weren't particularly
successful. Was it internally caused? Or did the Czech government cause it, or was it due to international circumstances, this second depression?
It was due to the policies that have been pursued by the Czech government exhausting their potential, so that you could, if you like, blame them.
So the recovery was fairly slow?
The recovery was slow, it was slow to get going, and when it did get going, it depended on foreign investment and exports to Western Europe. That was very much the important part of it.
With hindsight, is there anything that could have been done better?
It's always very difficult to know what the outcome would have been if you'd done things differently. You can never say for certain it would have been better. And always things were going to be difficult because, in fact, the industrial structure that was inherited was not up to the level of that of Western Europe. They'd been exporting into soft markets before, and the technology was not as advanced as elsewhere. So as soon as the economy opened, the industrial base came under threat, and it would have needed modernisation, new investment and so on to be able to compete successfully. So
where would the money have come from
well,
that?
You don't know if that would if it would ever have been successful. Money, not so much a problem. You can always make some progress from the base that you have, although that must be a question. How much would it have needed to develop what you had? How much could actually have been done? But I think it can be said fairly clearly, policies that were pursued didn't give a chance for that potential that was there. The way how enterprises were privatised didn't enable them to invest. It in fact took money away from them, didn't give them opportunities to develop. And so it is possible that had they done it differently, had they privatised more slowly, had they opened the economy more gradually, had they given various forms of state support to those big enterprises that were inherited from the past, it is possible they might have done better.
What is the structure of the Czech economy now as we speak?
The important point about the structure, as I've said, is the close links into Western Europe. If you look at the important changes that have taken place since 1989, one of them is a huge growth in new indigenous small enterprises. But what gives international competitiveness, what enables the economy to survive, is the ability to export, which is based on multinational companies that have come into the country and that export predominantly into Western Europe. So it's motor vehicles, electronics, things of that sort are the key sectors. Now they differ from those in the Western European countries because no Czech company is successful as being a world leader in any economic sphere. The success stories are all the branches of other foreign multinational companies.
In this sense, though, the Czech Republic is very much dependent on the state of the economy abroad, isn't it?
Yes.
If there is credit crunch in the West, it will be affected, won't it?
Yes, and indeed it has been affected. The nature of the world financial crisis, the financial side of it hasn't affected the Czech Republic particularly much. And again, you can blame or credit, depending on how you like to put it, that on the mistakes that were made in the 1990s that led to very serious problems in Czech banking, and it all was taken over by Western European banks, which have pursued very cautious policies within the Czech Republic. Mm-hmm. So whereas elsewhere they've pursued very rash forms of investment, in that case they have not. So the Czech banking sector has been reasonably safe, and the financial crisis as a purely financial thing has not been a problem. What has been a problem is the fall in demand, particularly for the motor vehicle sector, and as that is, I can't remember, I think it's 15% of Czech exports. So insofar as that has been very severely cut, so there's a substantial blow to the Czech economy.
Is the Czech economy well equipped for the future?
Depends entirely on whether that structure turns out to be right in the future. One of the characteristics of this, and indeed of previous financial and economic crises, is that the countries that seem to have caused it, often the richest countries in the world, are not the ones that suffer the most. Often it's poorer countries in the world that suffer the most. And in this respect, the Czech Republic belongs closer to the rich ones than to the poor ones. And I would think the kind of things that are made there and are exported from there actually in the long term are likely to give reasonably good prospects. Now you don't know, because it depends on the strategies of foreign multinational companies, and you don't know what they will decide to do. But if they continue to believe that Central European countries are a good place to invest and a good place to develop, then its prospects are quite good.
Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you.